Okay, so a deep bow. Hello and welcome to everyone who's here on Discord and also the people who are following along live on YouTube. We'll take a few minutes to get settled into the space. Then we will continue our reading and discussion of the book Flowers in the Dark, Reclaiming Our Power to Heal from Trauma through Mindfulness. Hi there, Amanda. Hello, Anastasia.
Hello, everyone.
So we'll start today with a little bit of meditation. You can firstly find a comfortable position for your body. Comfortable, simple position to lay down or sit or be in. Any position is okay as long as it's comfortable. At that time, you can begin to notice your breathing. Can take a few deep breaths to bring the mind home to the body. Allowing the breath to find a natural rhythm, flowing in, flowing out. Simply to begin noticing whatever there is to notice in this present moment. If you notice that there's any tension in your face or back or stomach, you can relax it. Through your mindful breathing, giving your attention to any place of tension in the body. Just coming home to this present moment and facing and being with whatever is here right now. Breathing in, we are aware of the whole body. Breathing out, we can smile towards the body. Breathing in, aware. Breathing out, smiling. Okay, so we will continue our reading where we left off Monday on this topic of the Four Noble Truths. Have you ever thought of suffering as being noble? The Buddha did, almost 2,600 years ago. However, suffering is only noble if we know how to turn inward and find the way out. Otherwise, suffering isn't noble at all. If we are hurt, we don't see any nobility in it. Mud alone is messy and sticky, but it can become beautiful lotus flowers if we know how to cultivate it skillfully. Soon after he reached enlightenment, the Buddha spoke of the Four Noble Truths about suffering. Suffering can serve the noble purpose of leading to enlightenment when there is understanding into its nature. This is the art of suffering, the art of living. When I was a doctor, I told myself that I would never have to worry about being unemployed because there would always be sick people to treat wherever I went. Then, when I became a nun, I realized that I would never have problems finding work in my monastic vocation either. Because even though people may not be physically sick, they may be sad or angry or full of tension. There will always be a way to help people and develop my understanding of life. A wonderful aspect of the monastic path that I have chosen is that I have a chance to take care of myself at a primary level. And it is from learning to understand and take care of my own body and mind that I may understand and help care for others more deeply and effectively. Through the application of mindfulness, I gain the necessary energy to heal and to help others heal. The healer, the healed, and the healing are no longer separate entities. They inter-are. Before we can try to help others, it is important to be able to address our own suffering and trauma, to face it, smile with it, breathe with it, embracing it day after day until it is no longer an enemy that we have to run away from, or a pool of sorrow to drown in. Our suffering can be a friend, and we can regard this friend with equanimity, tenderness, and love. Think of how animated and inspired you feel when you are in the presence of a true friend. Our suffering can give us the purpose, the energy, and the diligence to find a way to heal. The first noble truth, embracing our suffering. The first noble truth is awareness or mindfulness of the existence of suffering. It is the recognition and acknowledgement of the fact that we suffer. In fact, many of us suffer without realizing that we are suffering. For example, although we may be privileged enough to go shopping or to travel to other countries whenever we want, our consumption and diversions may actually be propelled by restlessness or discomfort. Shopping or travel may serve to divert our suffering for a while, but they in turn water the seeds of more restlessness and discomfort in our consciousness that will manifest again, sooner or later with strong intensity. When I was doing an internship in Kenya, I met Gladys, a young woman pregnant with a hydrocephalic child. She had no prenatal care, and in her community, people did not go to see doctors unless it was a life-threatening situation. We had to do a cesarean section because the child's head was enormous and could not be delivered otherwise. In hydrocephalus, the ventricle in the brain is blocked, so the cerebrospinal fluid cannot flow normally. As a result, the head becomes enlarged. The boy was born with a normal-sized body, but with a triple-sized head. He looked grotesque. Gladys was only 18 years old, and this was her first child. When I first saw that child, I was startled for a second. Yet this young mother held her child ever so gently. She stroked her son's head that was so heavy, large, and deformed. Gladys knew that her child might not live very long, but she loved him while he was still there. Can you hold your suffering in the same way, as your own child, as a part of yourself that you can care for, that you can be with? Many people say, I just want to forget my suffering, or I just want to get rid of it. Yet we cannot just let go of it that easily. Maybe we can forget it temporarily. Some pharmaceutical companies even try to invent drugs that can block certain memories, or actually erase memories, like the protagonists in the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. However, it's not possible to erase certain memories selectively. When people medicate themselves to forget, they not only forget their painful memories, but also their joyful ones. Do you really want to erase your memories? Our spiritual practice is not for the purpose of forgetting or of blocking our seeing or feeling. Instead, we have a spiritual practice in our daily life so that we can hold our pain and suffering, whether it is physical or mental, in the same way that the young woman Gladys could hold her child so tenderly and patiently. How she held that child. Anyone have some thoughts about this first noble truth of suffering? And this idea of our spiritual practice not to forget or in any way to get rid of our suffering, but to learn how to hold it tenderly, to embrace our suffering. we can take a few moments to sit with this first noble truth of suffering. Maybe we feel a little bit uncomfortable, or we don't feel completely enlightened right now. So we can take a moment to sit with that and breathe with whatever we happen to be feeling right now. And this willingness, kind of to act on this willingness to hold our uncomfortableness, to hold our suffering tenderly and patiently with our mindfulness of breathing. The second noble truth, the causes of suffering. The second noble truth is about awareness or mindfulness of the causes of suffering, whether it is psychological, physical, and or verbal, and the conditions that feed and perpetuate the suffering. So the second noble truth is about awareness or mindfulness of the causes of suffering, whether it is psychological, physical, and or verbal, and the conditions that feed and perpetuate the suffering. The Buddha said that nothing can survive without food, and this is true of suffering. The practice of mindfulness, stopping and deep looking, enable us to discover how we have been feeding our suffering. In this chapter, we will also look at the practice of the 4 diligences, which empower us to stop our suffering from perpetuating. In contemplating the 4 Noble Truths, we acknowledge the chief complaint that there is suffering, and then we reflect on the causes and conditions in order to confirm that there is a way out. In modern medicine, we call this taking a history of the patient. Just like in the first noble truth, taking a history of the patient starts out with their chief complaint. For example, I have had a cough for 3 weeks now. Then the doctor proceeds to investigate the chronological progression of the patient's present illness from the first sign and symptom to the present. The doctor also asks about the patient's past medical history, family history, psychological history, and social circumstance, etc. Then the doctor may order some blood work and other lab tests to determine the causes in order to make the diagnosis. This is equivalent to the second noble truth, identifying the causes and conditions of the disease. The Buddha pioneered this approach over 2,500 years ago, and aptly he was referred to as the King of Medicine. As a young novice, when I first heard Thich Nhat Hanh giving his famous teaching, "Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional," it shook me to the core. A part of me felt indignant and rebellious. What do you mean suffering is optional? I have suffered all my life, and you say that it is optional? I felt that Tay's statement undermined and trivialized the trauma that I had endured in my life. Nevertheless, something deep inside me knew that my teacher was right. Learning to be more aware of the workings of my mind, I saw more clearly how my way of thinking, speaking, and behaving fed my own suffering and perpetuated it. Even if physical or emotional pain only takes place in a single moment of time, the suffering that results from our negative interpretations and unmindful reactions towards that pain is continuous, relentless, unbearable, and long lasting. I began to have insight into my state of PTSD. I had identified myself by my suffering for many years, so it was not easy to just let it go. To be able to embrace suffering is a process of getting to know its roots, of living in harmony and in non-fear with the past, the present, and the future. Suffering is an art that can be learned and mastered. The art of suffering can bring about deep appreciation for life, as well as profound peace, joy, and love for ourselves and other beings. Thus, the art of suffering and the art of happiness are not two separate entities. They inter-are. The Buddha explained that we suffer because of our wrong views and wrong thinking. The phenomena that we experience in our lives are impermanent and without a discrete self. But because we think of them as permanent and with a self, we suffer. When something feels good, we want to be with it all the time, and we suffer when we must be apart from it. When something feels bad, we want to reject it, and we suffer when we must face it. Therefore, suffering is not intrinsic in the phenomena themselves. Suffering results from our attachment or aversion to experiences. Any thoughts? Questions?
Even though we may know that suffering would not last, sometimes we can't help but still experience it. So we still go through the pain, and I'm just thinking about um, such as grief. We know that we are not here existing forever. We know that when our loved ones pass, we will miss them. Um, but and over time, the grief will go away, but we still go through it. We still endure the pain. We still endure the suffering, even though we know it's not permanent. So, how do we sort of get through that?
So there's this analogy or story in the Buddhist teaching about the second arrow. So that the first arrow is this experience, maybe loss of a loved one or a physically painful experience or a psychologically painful experience. And then we feel that first arrow and then we are trying to ignore it. Why do I find myself in this situation? of suffering. Who did this? What was it made of? So that's just like the second. That's just like the second arrow um, hitting us is our. I think it's an unwillingness to be involved with our suffering. It's an unwillingness to hold that suffering. And it is temporary, it's not going to stay around. But because we feel that it's permanent, and because we feel that there's a self in it, we are we are unwilling to hold it. We're unwilling to participate in the art of suffering. We're not willing to be with that suffering. And so we suffer a lot more. So we go back to what the last paragraph we read. The Buddha explained that we suffer because of our wrong views and wrong thinking. The phenomena that we experience in our lives are impermanent and without a discrete self. So someone dies, or someone says something to us, or something changes in our experience and we don't like it. We get blamed instead of praised, something like this. The phenomena that we experience is completely temporary, and it's also without a discrete self or a real self entity, a real someone or something, or like there's not a real separate situation from the whole of our life that's unfolding and happening right now. But because we think of them as permanent in that moment, we just kind of get into that small mindedness, and with a self, we suffer. When something feels good, we want to be with it all the time, and we suffer when we must be apart from it. So I was listening to a teacher recently, part of a group called the Hillside Hermitage, and he was talking about this. This monk was talking about um, the Buddha said to see pleasurable experiences as painful, to see those pleasurable experiences that you have as pain. Because, partly at least, when something feels good and we see it as good and pleasurable, we want to be with it all the time. And we suffer when we must be apart from it, and we must be apart from whatever we experience. And then when something feels bad, we want to reject it, and we suffer when we must face it. So we can't control what, the body feels a lot of pain. It feels bad, we want to reject it, and then when we must face it, like a lot of things in our lives, we have to face it. We suffer because we want to reject it. So therefore, suffering is not intrinsic in the phenomena themselves. Suffering results from our attachment or aversion to experiences. Um, and so this art of suffering is kind of this art of being with these wrong views and wrong thinking, being with these difficult experiences that we are unwilling to be with, so that we can learn how to not be attached and not be averse to these feelings. That's how I'm seeing it right now. So, the art of being with suffering and the art of being with happiness, because we just want to be with happiness. We don't want to be with suffering. So, when it comes to that suffering, when it comes to that attachment or aversion to experiences, we're not willing to face it. We're not willing to be with it and connect with it and touch it. And so we keep perpetuating these wrong views and wrong thinking that lead us to suffer more. So to be able to embrace suffering from our book here, To be able to embrace suffering is a process of getting to know its roots, of living in harmony and in non-fear with the past, the present, and the future. Suffering is an art that can be learned and mastered. The art of suffering can bring about deep appreciation for life, as well as profound peace, joy, and love for ourselves and other beings. Okay, so more to the point, um, so Sister Dang Nghiem, relayed that Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional," and that shook her to her core. You know, she went through all this trauma, she went through all these difficulties, and you're saying all this was optional, this suffering I went through. Nevertheless, from the book, something deep inside me knew that my teacher was right. Learning to be more aware of the workings of my mind, I saw more clearly how my way of thinking, speaking, and behaving fed my own suffering and perpetuated it. Even if physical or emotional pain only takes place in a single moment in time, maybe what you were referring to, Anastasia, um, that physical or emotional pain, even if it only takes place in a single moment of time, the suffering that results from our negative interpretations and unmindful reactions toward that pain is continuous, relentless, unbearable, and long lasting. So, if we can apply more mindfulness and positive interpretations to that pain, to that suffering experience, um, then perhaps this suffering, this pain won't be so continuous and long lasting if we can be more mindful in how we hold it and embrace it. Okay, we have a few comments over on the YouTube. Sonja says, Sanja M says, the suffering becomes the norm with untreated PTSD, feeling stuck in a negative feedback loop. Robert Lynch says, using the term suffering and demons as the same, you mentioned a while back to welcome the demon, show kindness and sympathy, then return to the breath. Yeah, I mean, that sounds really good, right? If we can be aware of our restlessness, if we can be aware of our uncomfortableness and kind of welcome that demon with kindness and look it in the face and embrace it with our mindfulness. And Island Mama says, my unwillingness to hold suffering is often related to my desire to avoid responsibility for loving myself through pain, instead preferring to cast blame and responsibility elsewhere. That's a interesting phrase, Island Mama. Um, avoiding avoiding the responsibility for loving myself through pain. Interesting. Anyone else? Does anyone feel inspired to take a turn reading for the Third Noble Truth if you have the book in front of you? Okay, onward we go to the third noble truth. Happiness is entirely possible. The third noble truth is about the cessation of suffering. In other words, the presence of true happiness. Many of us live as if in the here and now only plans, projects, worries, regrets, and fears are possible, but not happiness. We believe superstitiously that happiness belongs to a distant past or to a dreamy future, but not in the present moment. The third noble truth is equivalent to making a prognosis in modern medicine, which is the predicted outcome of the illness. Depending on the patient's general health condition and the diagnosis, whether it is lung cancer, COVID-19, or a simple cold. Then the doctor proposes a treatment plan for the patient. In the third noble truth, the Buddha was fully confident and optimistic in declaring cessation of ill-being is entirely possible. Ill-being can be transformed 100%. So this is how Thich Nhat Hanh has translated that Buddhist word dukkha, which is most often translated as suffering. To call it as ill-being. Cessation of ill-being is entirely possible. Ill-being can be transformed 100%. Thus, suffering can be transformed into happiness. This prognosis affirms that indeed happiness belongs to the present moment, right here and right now, if you comply to the treatment. The treatment that the Buddha prescribes is the Noble Eightfold Path, which leads to complete transformation and healing. In the sutra known as the Buddha's Diagnosis, the Buddha further asserted that the Noble Eightfold Path has the capacity to prevent the illness from ever reoccurring. In the past, many Buddhist scholars misinterpreted the Four Noble Truths as pessimistic, that the Buddha claimed this world is only full of suffering. Everything is suffering and there is no way out of it. However, as we look deeply into all Four Noble Truths, we see that they are remarkably scientific and optimistic. So the third noble truth, that there is a ending of suffering, that suffering can come to an end. The fourth noble truth, the way out of suffering into happiness via the Eightfold Path. The fourth noble truth is about the concrete practices of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right mindfulness, right concentration, right view, right thinking, right speech, right bodily actions, right livelihood, and right diligence. If we practice the right approaches, if we practice the right approach in these 8 areas, we are bound to come out of suffering. The Four Noble Truths, together with the Eightfold Path, can be approached as a kind of Buddhist 12-step program. Although they offer an even deeper transformation of those habits of mind that spark suffering in us. They provide concrete practices to transform the addiction to and perpetuation of suffering at its root, guaranteeing the fruit of happiness in every moment that we are practicing them. As Thich Nhat Hanh pointed out, whether we follow the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path is a choice point leading to suffering or happiness, or as nutriments feeding suffering or happiness. In this light, the Four Noble Truths are astonishingly sober, asserting that we have agency in our happiness or suffering, which we can cultivate with a sense of purpose and intention. Mindfulness is the energy that enables us to wake up and listen to the cry of our own suffering, embracing it tenderly, the way of a mother holding her child in her arms. To acknowledge our own discomfort and to find its causes so we can remedy the problem and bring about relief and well-being. If we know how to deal properly with suffering, we will suffer less, and we will be able to transform it into understanding, love, healing, and happiness. We can acknowledge the value and usefulness of suffering, and we do not have to run away from it anymore. So, suffering as being something that we can use to establish ourselves in happiness, not something that we need to in any way avoid or run away from. So, this is anything but a nihilistic or negative point of view on the situation. It is important to practice the steps of the Noble Eightfold Path in our daily lives. We can experience great insights, but if we don't have a way to practice in our daily life, these insights may not become realized. Then there is a danger that we may see ourselves as hypocritical or helpless and lose the confidence to keep walking on the path. There is the saying, ignorance is bliss. It is more painful when we see the situation we are in and we cannot change it. For example, most of my life before I woke up to the depth of my trauma, I suffered, but I was largely unconscious of its source. Then when I went to my first mindfulness retreat, I came back more aware, but unable to maintain the practice I had learned on retreat since I had returned to the daily stress of a young doctor's job. Actually, my pain felt more excruciating because I had become keenly aware of my situation. At that point, we cannot be in basic survival mode any longer, and we know that we are not being true to ourselves. It is painful to clearly see our dilemma in this light for the first time. The Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path offer us a way out. The four diligences, handling seeds emerging from store consciousness. Together with the Noble Eightfold Path, in Buddhism we have an abundance of teachings that help us heal our suffering. For trauma survivors, the Buddhist psychology idea of seeds of consciousness can be very powerful and liberating. Our consciousness is like a storehouse of possibilities, which are like seeds in storage. So we call it store consciousness. This corresponds with our subconscious mind in Western psychology. Embedded within our store consciousness are various kinds of wholesome and unwholesome seeds. The unwholesome seeds lead to thoughts, speech, and bodily actions that nurture life, peace, harmony, happiness, and inclusiveness. On the other side of the spectrum, unwholesome seeds lead to destruction, discrimination, conflict, and division. When a seed held in store consciousness manifests at the more easily perceived level of the conscious mind, or what we often call mind consciousness, it is referred to as a mental formation, such as joy, love, desire, depression, etc. For example, if you tend to be depressed, meditation may help you identify this tendency as a seed of depression in your store consciousness. It may be a seed you have inherited from your ancestors. The practice of the 4 diligences aims at the mental formations emerging from store consciousness into mind consciousness as soon as they start to manifest. So this understanding that in this store consciousness, in this unconscious, there are seeds which have been planted from our experiences, from our interactions, from past choices that we've made, these kinds of things that we come across. And then we don't really know when or how or where this seed is going to sprout or kind of show up. But once it does, we can say that it's appeared in our mind consciousness, from the unconscious to the conscious. So the practice of the 4 diligences aims at the mental formations emerging from store consciousness into mind consciousness as soon as they start to manifest. This is a process of mindful consumption, an intake of not just concrete things like food, but of all kinds of sense impressions and sensations. In our daily life, we continually bring images, sounds, conversations, tastes, touch, thoughts, perceptions, etc., into our store consciousness. Even a smell can trigger a certain memory. A cologne or perfume can bring back the image of someone you have not seen for years. A food smell can make you think of grandma's cooking. And a thought itself can trigger an entire physiological stress response, as in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder. So let's just take a moment for mindfulness. Can do some mindful breathing. Let's come back home to our body and our breath. Preventing the negative seeds from taking root in our consciousness requires us to stop and remain calm. It's similar to not aggravating an already angry dog who's ready to bite us. Some years ago, while living at Magnolia Grove Monastery in Tennessee, I would often go out jogging alone. One day, 3 dogs started barking aggressively from their front yard as soon as they saw me. I stood still, and they crossed the road, still barking and circling me. The biggest of the 3 dogs jumped up on me, up to my waistline, smearing saliva all over my brown pants. The medium-sized dog circled and barked continuously, but it did not jump on me. The smallest dog just stood by and barked at me from a short distance. The whole time I just stood still and breathed. Occasionally I would say softly to the dogs, "It's okay, my dear." After a while, the smallest dog became quiet. Then he started to bark at the other 2. It was clear that he was communicating with the others. Then he took a few steps back away from me. The other 2 dogs also began to back off. Then all 3 ran back to their front yard. They continued to bark at me a while longer, but mildly. I remained standing still until they had returned to their house, and then I slowly continued on my way. As long as I remain calm and non-reactive, I have learned that aggressive dogs will eventually walk away. I have also learned to be calm in frightening situations with people, and it has saved my life several times. If we react with fear and hatred, our reaction may further sow the seeds of aggression and ruthlessness in humans as well as in dogs, while our energy of stillness and calm makes them return to their original quiet state. This energy of peacefulness is not passive, but extremely active. It is a non-violent approach to a violent situation, and it may not come naturally to us. We need to understand how it works and train for it. The 4 diligences help us generate this energy. Okay, do we have some people here who have the book in front of them? Anyone have the book in front of you? Robert, I know you have the book in front of you. Is it right?
I do, Bante. I do. Um, I was concerned that my connection would be intermittent. But are you looking for someone to read?
Sure, if someone would like to read, then that's nice. Just we'll do one.
Okay.
There's 4 of these diligences, so if we could take some turns for reading, that'd be good. But if your connection's not strong, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, let me try. I'll do the
Okay.
first diligence, and if
Yeah,
I
that sounds
sound like
good.
a robot, you can let me go.
It sounds okay. Go ahead.
Okay. The first diligence: maintain and support positive mental formations. The first diligence is to keep a positive state of mind. If the mental formations are wholesome, then we want to keep them in the mind consciousness for as long as possible, which in turn nurtures these particular wholesome seeds in the store consciousness. Actively recognizing the condition create further advantageous conditions from them. For example, if we know that a certain group of friends usually makes us feel engaged and positive, then we would want to create opportunities to interact with them more frequently.
Okay, thank you, Robert. That was wonderful. And I'll go
Thank you.
ahead and repeat it. It was a little low on my end. Maybe some other people heard it well, but I'll just repeat it for posterity's sake.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, it was lovely. I really enjoyed listening to it. I can see why you all show up and listen to me read because it's very pleasant. listen to a friendly voice reading the Buddhist teaching. So thank you, Robert, and I'll read what Robert just read as well. The first diligence: maintain and support positive mental formations. The first diligence is to keep a positive state of mind. If the mental formations are wholesome, then we want to keep them in the mind consciousness for as long as possible, which in turn nurtures these particular wholesome seeds in the store consciousness. Actively recognizing the conditions that help these wholesome mental formations to manifest, we can maintain these conditions and create further advantageous conditions for them. For example, if we know that a certain group of friends usually makes us feel engaged and positive, then we would want to create opportunities to interact with them more frequently. Well, we aspire to be one of those groups of friends here. So it's nice. Anyone have some idea or something to share about this first diligence? Maybe like a use case when you can imagine applying um, this practice, this diligence.
I have a question about a friend that I would like him to come hear the teaching because he's suffering very, very much. And we talk about what I learned here. And I feel that he's open, but he's suffering so much that he resists. And all the time at the last minute, he's having a reason not to listen or not to try to do some reading or and it's really is crying every day for 3 months. So I know it could make him feel better, but I don't know how to make him apply or listening things that he's feel that it's maybe very beautiful but far from his life. How can how can I make an encourage him, encourager to do something like us or to come or
Well, what I can say, and this is a good question, some other people might have answers as well. But what I can say is offering your presence and attention to that person may be all that you can do. For people that have a lot of suffering or are stuck in a certain way of being that perpetuates their suffering, um, any any difficulty or any step that they need to take outside of the steps that they're already taking to deal with their trying, as skillfully as they can to deal with their suffering, is puts them off. So even though if it maybe it would be an ideal situation for them to come and practice with us, but it's only a fantasy unless it's practical. So if you can offer your attention and your presence to someone, then that's one of the best things that I can think of doing.
okay, thank you.
And I will say you can also support your friend with this first diligence, right? To keep a positive state of mind, and when a positive mental formation, a wholesome mental formation comes up, you just keep it. You stay with it as long as you can. You don't need to eat, you don't need to sleep, you don't need to drink. Just cultivate that seed, as much as you can. Water that seed as much as you can. Keep them in the mind consciousness for as long as possible. That good intention, that practice of generosity, that wholesome state of mind to help to bring benefit, or peace or happiness or joy, gentleness. Keep it in mind as much as possible, as long as possible. Okay, we'll go to the second diligence. So the first diligence is maintain and support positive mental formations. So when a positive mental formation comes up, try to maintain it and stay with it and feed it as long as possible. It's the first diligence. The second diligence, and a part of that, an example of that Sister Dang Nghiem gave, if we know that a certain group of friends usually makes us feel engaged and positive, then we would want to create opportunities to interact with them more frequently. That may also be activities in our life or spaces in our life, certain environments. We would want to make opportunities to be in those environments more frequently. The second diligence, help more positive seeds to manifest. The second diligence is that if the wholesome seeds have not yet manifested, then we help create conditions for them to manifest. When wholesome mental formations manifest in the landscape of our mind consciousness, the quality of our lives improves. We can contribute positively to our families and society. This is also a practice of planting flowers in the garden. The more trees and flowers we plant, the less space there is for weeds to grow. We actively cultivate wholesome seeds and give them room to grow. So, the second diligence of helping more positive seeds to manifest, that means we're doing good deeds more and more, and we are finding conditions, we're putting ourselves in conditions to support those wholesome activities and those good deeds to happen and to take place. The third diligence, return negative mental formations to store consciousness. The third and fourth diligences are directed at the unwholesome seeds that are in our store consciousness. Unwholesome here means like negative thought, unskillful thought, something that causes you or someone you care about to suffer. Unwholesome, not promoting peace, joy, happiness, freedom, healing. So the third and fourth diligences are directed at the unwholesome seeds that are in our store consciousness. If negative seeds manifest in the mind consciousness as negative and unwholesome mental formations, such as jealousy, greed, anger, and competitiveness, then we do what we can to bring them back to our store consciousness. We can do this by inviting the energy of mindfulness to arise, to embrace the negative emotions and calm them down. This is done through mindful breathing, walking meditation, abdominal breathing, intentional breathing, sitting meditation, and so forth. For example, we can practice with Breathing in, I am aware of anger arising in me. Breathing out, I smile and relax my anger. Or, breathing in, I am aware that I have a strong perception about somebody. Breathing out, am I sure that is correct? And it's true, if we can stay on top of these mental formations, these negative mental states in this way, they will happen much less. They will go back to the store consciousness, and they won't be like a flower that blooms and then plants more seeds. But through our mindfulness and our awareness, we can send that flower, send that seed back to the store consciousness. Of course, there are situations when we need to act quickly and decisively. When a house is burning down, it is essential to extinguish the fire and to save whatever we can. Only afterward would we try to find the cause of the fire. Similarly, when there is a storm of emotion, we should try to protect our body and mind from being burned up or destroyed by it. Mindful breathing and the simple recognition of our strong emotions enable us to master our emotions more promptly and effectively. Once we have a calm body and clarity of mind, then we can look deeply into the triggering factors of our strong emotion. Each time we are able to calm down, return an unwholesome mental formation back to the store consciousness, and understand its root, the seed will become weaker. Eventually, it will manifest with less frequency and intensity. Another practice is changing the song, giving rise to a positive thought, to a feeling of empathy and understanding, to right view and right thinking. We can direct our attention to something positive that is also available in the present moment. The fourth diligence, keep the negative seeds from arising. The fourth diligence is directed at the unwholesome seeds in our store consciousness. They have not yet manifested in our mind consciousness. They can then remain dormant. Recently, a teenager told me, "I just don't like to play violent video games anymore. It doesn't make me feel good anyway." She stopped subjecting herself to stimuli that she found harmful, and thus she was able to prevent the negative cascade of reactions from arising within them in the first place. With awareness of how our body feels in certain situations, we will be able to stop feeding the negative seeds that still lie dormant in our consciousness. Why is it essential to keep the negative seeds from arising or from feeding them? Through the power of affinity, manifestation of some unwholesome seeds may trigger a host of other unwholesome seeds, which impede the growth, restoration, and healing of our body and mind. Then, when a highly stressful situation takes place, like a pandemic, a severe illness, a death of a loved one, these unbeneficial seeds may flood our mind consciousness, impairing our judgments, affecting severely our speech and behaviors, and aggravating pre-existing conditions. So, this question, why is it so essential to keep the negative seeds from arising or from feeding them? because through the power of affinity, this thing being somewhat connected to that thing, manifestation of some unwholesome seeds, even though it's not something that you're particularly worried about or see to be a big problem, the manifestation of some unwholesome seeds may trigger a host of other unwholesome seeds, which will impede your overall growth, restoration, and healing of our body and mind. For example, since the advent of COVID-19, many more people have reported suffering from PTSD, depression, and anxiety. The incidences of domestic violence, sexual abuse, overdoses, suicide, and homicide have increased. All these phenomena reflect how unequipped we are as individuals and as a society in taking care of our trauma. Knowing that such pain will continue to affect us long after the pandemic has passed, we can be determined to apply the 4 diligences in our daily life so that we may have a greater capacity for transformation and healing. So these 4 diligences of maintain and support positive mental formations, help more positive seeds to manifest, return negative mental formations to store consciousness with your mindfulness and your attentiveness, with your mindful breathing, and finally, keep the negative seeds from arising. So be careful about the kinds of things you're consuming or getting involved with that may bring up the arising of a negative seed. So that's where we are going to stop our reading today. But we have some space for if anyone wants to share anything or speak up or ask a question. We'll leave the space open for that and also a few moments of mindful breathing before we finish.
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is a little louder. What do you think about there's essential states of anger and trauma? What do you think of shame or regret, where something you've done or said a long time ago that you regret doing or feel shame for doing, even if it's minor, but it still appears in your mind again and again? And these are negative seeds that I have been unable to send away. Does this process vary at all when looking at a past minor mistake and continuing to think about it long since after it served its purpose? Any advice appreciated?
Yeah. So one thing that stood out was the kind of getting rid of, and how Sister Dang Nghiem puts it here is to return to the store consciousness. So you're not actually rejecting it. You're not trying to get rid of it, but you're returning it to wherever it has come from. This store consciousness that's full of all kinds of different seeds, sounds, smells, sights, experiences that we've had. So there was something in the reading something else that I thought was helpful for this point. Yeah. So um, mindful breathing and the simple recognition of our strong emotion, okay, enable us to master our emotions more promptly and effectively. Once we have a calm body and clarity of mind, then we can look deeply into the triggering factors of our strong emotion. So, what triggered this shame or this guilt to come up in your present, into your mind consciousness at this moment? What triggered it to come up? Once we have a calm body and clarity of mind, and this is kind of I think the clear pointer here. Each time we are able to calm down, return an unwholesome mental formation back to the store consciousness, and understand its root, the seed will become weaker. Eventually, it will manifest with less frequency and intensity. So the practice is not to get rid of it, not to reject it, but rather each time we are able to calm down, return an unwholesome mental formation back to the store consciousness. So this store consciousness is full of all of these interactions and experiences that we've had, and there's not really a self in there. It's just like a store. It's a store consciousness. It's a kind of container of all of these seeds of interactions, is how I would say it. And so, depending on certain conditions, a seed will kind of sprout and maybe become like a mental formation. So, at that time, if we try to fight against it, we feed it, and really it never works out. You can't fight against something that comes up, um, because it's coming from this place that you can't really interact with, so you can't control in a complete way. It's been my experience. So each time that we can notice that, calm down in the face of that shame, that guilt, that lust coming up, calm down and return an unwholesome mental formation back to the store consciousness and understand its root, understand where it comes from. The seed will become weaker, and eventually it will manifest with less frequency and intensity. So then at that time, sure, it may come up, but with less frequency and far less intensity, you're much less predisposed to be stuck in the self notion about it. That this self, this I really did this, or I deserve to be ashamed or punished, or, these kinds of things. But just it's something that comes up and passes away. And as you can learn to calm down and return that unwholesome mental formation back to the store consciousness, to return it, to kind of send it back, attend to it, be aware of it, and send it back without becoming overly involved with it, but just your mindful breathing, attending to it, sending it back, and understanding its root, the seed will become weaker. You don't react to it, positively or negatively. They're both basically the same thing. You try to reject it, it's the same as trying to, get some kind of pleasure out of it or embrace it, hold on to it. So as you can return it back to the store consciousness, understand its root, where it comes from, really cause and effect. Certain conditions came about, and so that seed manifested in your mind consciousness. Then eventually it will manifest with less frequency and intensity, and surely then you'll be less self-identified with it.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add to this answer that you have given that we need to stay in the present. When we're feeling guilty or regretful for something we have done or experienced in the past, yeah, we need to identify what is causing it, but also to remember that it is not happening right now. because it's hard to remember things, especially when it's so vividly. But I try to remember that it's not longer happening, that I have no way to answer that now, that now my context and my present is different. So it has no sense to regret about it or to try to solve something that I'm not able to anymore, that I need to keep living. And so I try to stay in the present, but before that, I have already observed it, observed the guilt, observed the shame and the pain, and try to understand why is it there. So I think it's like doing both things in different moments, depending on what we are feeling and how is this guilt expressed, because sometimes it comes as anger and then I cannot I need to keep on breathing. But when it is related to pain and I'm crying or saying stuff inside my head.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anna. And I will also say that,
You're
oh,
muted,
yeah,
Dante.
sorry. I will also say that, thank you, Anna. It also applies to not just like a negative thing, like we want to forget or we want to get rid of it because it's, we have that feeling at least because it's negative, but also pleasurable things, right? So it's not that you're trying to get away from this trauma or you're trying to hide this part of yourself. You are, instead of getting wrapped up in what's false, this kind of delusion or this past thing, you're coming into the present. So it's not just about that was bad. It might have been the best experience of your life, the most wonderful thing, and you can't stop thinking about it or dwelling on it, etc. That's not what's happening right now. Or this fantasy about someone, or this fantasy about your life. Noticing when the mind gets into that drifted off state, and you come back to your mindfulness of breathing, you come back to what's happening right now. And this is not that, even though it might come up, even though it might be clear or vivid, and try to involve you in some way. It's not what's happening right now. Anyone else?
I'd like to say today's reading was very informative and I really enjoyed all of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We went a little bit longer than usual, but that's okay. It's good. All right, so we can finish up with just a few words of metta, kind of a metta prayer, and then we'll do 3 sadhus together. All right, so we can all bring our hands together if you like, and you can repeat after me. We'll say some words of loving friendliness, loving kindness. May I be happy, peaceful, and free from suffering. May I be happy, free, and safe. May each and every breath be a source of joy. May all beings, near or far away, be happy and at peace. May all beings, known and unknown, be happy and free from fear. May all beings throughout space and time find joy in each and every breath. May it be so. May it be so. May it truly be so. Sadhu. Sadhu. And we can make a bow. Okay. Thank you all for being here. We will have our Zen focused meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we'll have a more silent meditation practice tomorrow at this time period. Okay? Thank you all for being here. Be happy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.